Good evening. I'm Jonathan Mususa with a special edition of WUVT News, an interview with the Democratic nominee for the 41st Virginia House of Delegates District, Lily Franklin. Ms. Franklin, thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and for this conversation.
All right. Now, on November 4th, you will be facing Republican incumbent Chris Obenshain. In 2023, you lost to Obenshain by a margin of 183 votes. What do you think led to your loss then, and how do you think things in the 41st have changed since then?
I think just looking at the world and where we're at right now, so much has changed since 2023. You know, when I ran in 2023, so many people told me my race wasn't winnable, that we'd have no shot at winning this seat. And then we came up short by 183 votes. I think the biggest differences now is that people are familiar with our race and they know what we're doing, and they understand that I am running a campaign that is fundamentally different than some of the other races, being that I want to give people something to vote for and not necessarily just voting against something. And I think that people are excited about that. They are ready for new leaders, a new generation of leadership, and so it just feels a lot different when we're out talking in the community. And so there's a lot. And then also this is one of the top seats to flip in Virginia as well, and so there's more investment and more eyes on this district.
Expand a little on that idea you mentioned earlier about giving people something to vote for rather than vote against.
Yeah, so for me, when I started this campaign, when I decided to run again, I always tell people it was harder to decide to run the second time around than the first time because you know what you're getting yourself into. But for me, when we had our last election in 2024, I was really ready to give people something to be excited about, to vote for, giving people a vision of what the world could look like and what policies we're presenting. And, I talk about over and over, I come from a working class background. I struggle to make ends meet. How do we make people's lives better and not just talking about how my opponent isn't doing it? For me, it's making sure people aren't having to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, that that they have access to a world-class education system, that our seniors have the ability to retire with the dignity they deserve. And so, for me, that's what I mean by I'm presented the vision of what I hope to do when I'm elected, and not so much focused on villainizing my opponent.
Now, in a piece for Cardinal News, Elizabeth Beyer wrote that while you tend to avoid houses with Obenshain signs out front while door knocking, you would go to a house with a statewide Republican ticket sign out front. What inspired that outreach approach, and what has that gotten you?
For me, I grew up here. I have 5 generations of my family that are from Southwest Virginia. I even have currently a family here from 2 to 92 in this district, in this region. And so when I go door to door and talking to people, I am bringing people in because I'm from here and I understand the struggles that people are going through day to day, and I'm meeting people where they are at. And so for me, I don't want to write anybody off. I think that I want to present my vision and hope that they're in buying it and that they're interested in being a part of this future. And so I talk to people across the spectrum, and that's why I've built this wide coalition of support. I don't just have Democratic support. I have people who've told me they voted for Donald Trump that are voting for me. I had one man who told me he's voted Republican every election since he turned 18, and he's in his 60s now. But this year he would be voting for me. I even have one woman who loved Marjorie Taylor Greene, but we were able to bond and connect about clean drinking water because she's really worried about that, and that's something that I've worked to address. And so I've built this coalition, not of just Democrats, but of everyone, because people want somebody that's going to lead them to help people and really going to be devoted to the community and uplifting their voices. And so that's what we've done. And so I just don't write people off. I just want to present my vision and see what they have, and I want to hear what they have to say and what they're worried about. It doesn't matter if they're a Democrat or a Republican. They're going to have issues, and I want to know what they are because I'll be representing both of them.
Now, when you're out doing this coalition building work, what kind of issues seem to garner the most consensus?
Yeah, when I'm out there talking to people, I hear over and over that people are ready for leadership that's less chaotic, that they want somebody to just deliver on the everyday working issues. They want lower electric bills. They want to be able to go to the doctor when they need to, that they have health insurance, but also have specialty doctors right here in Montgomery County. That's a huge problem we have in this district. People are really concerned about making sure they have access to affordable housing, whether that be buying a home or even renting right here. And And so they are looking for somebody that is, I don't want to say making politics boring, but almost like delivering on those things that people, because those are the things that matter. They just want to make, if we can make their lives better, that's what they're looking for. And that's what they're looking for in leadership. And I just hear that door after door after door.
Okay. And let's explore your past for a moment. While at Longwood University, you earned a degree in political science. What led you to pursue that particular path, and what did that experience teach you?
You know, for me, I decided to go down that path. I grew up in a family that struggled to make ends meet oftentimes. I had a parent that was struggling with addiction throughout my childhood, and that plagued a lot of what I grew up with. I had, families that struggled with prison and foster care system and things like that. And I just watched over and over how people in my family, myself, we fell through cracks in the system. And I just had this burning desire to want to help people. And so that's why I went into political science. But it wasn't really until I got into my career that I realized, working in the state legislature, I worked for Delegate Rasul, where I learned the power that we really can help so many people at the state level. And people would call in and have constituent concerns and similar things that I dealt with as a kid. And I could work to resolve it. And sometimes in 48 hours, a situation for me that would plague myself for a whole year could be resolved with one phone call. And so for me, it always comes back to wanting to help people. And that was kind of what inspired me to go into political science.
And with your background as someone from Southwest Virginia with working class roots, former math teacher, and how has that shaped your view of power and those who wield it here in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, that was, for me, I know in Southwest Virginia we're often overlooked. So many people, when you talk to people in this community, they say, well, everybody thinks Virginia falls off at Charlottesville and they forget about the rest of the state. I grew up in a working class family where they struggled to make ends meet, but it was really when I got older that I realized that my families, our struggles, we weren't the exception, we were the rule. And so I realized early on that I wanted to help make sure and make that change for people, and that's what made me want to run for office. Is I realized that we do have an ability to help people and help them get out of their situations, that we were elected, we can make sure that people aren't struggling to make ends meet, that we can make their lives better. And so for me, that's I learned from the struggles I went through that it doesn't have to be like that. We can make things better, and that's what I'm going to keep fighting for.
Right, so in other venues, you've mentioned the importance of outreach to Virginia Tech students to your campaign. How would you describe your outreach to college students?
We have been, since I launched the campaign, we've been on campus all year long. Last semester we went out and talked to different club groups, any groups that wanted to hear from us. We connected with them. I know some groups that can't have political parties come in, so that we didn't do that. But any group that was interested in hearing from us and us hearing from them, we met with them. I've met with leaders of different groups. I've talked to community members. I've also knocked thousands of doors across this district, and including student doors, where I met people right on their doorstep, and I've heard their stories and what they're concerned about, and that's kind of, you'll hear, reflective of my vision of what I want to do and how I want to help students. And now, since we've come back on campus, since y'all have come back for the fall semester, we've been out on campus. I think we have our team here almost every single day, ready to listen to students and hear their stories and their concerns, and make sure that we're addressing them when I'm elected.
All right, so as of course you know, Blacksburg is a college town. In college towns, there's often much talk of a town-gown divide. And when you're having these conversations with both college students and members of the community, are there any issues that one group tends to care about more than the other? Mm-hmm. Or are there any issues that are similarly important to both groups?
Overall, when you talk to folks in the community, we people who live in Blacksburg knew Virginia Tech existed when they moved here. It's been here. Most folks have watched it grow. I think where we have the biggest divide is that we have to make sure that we're bringing all of the partners and entities together to have conversations. Some of the places that people all are on the same place is affordable housing. Right now, that's a huge concern for students who we've had a 38% increase in rent just over the past year, but we haven't seen wages go up. And so any students that are having to pay for their housing but are also working to pay their way through college, they're now really struggling to pay their rent. But that doesn't stop with just students. It affects me. I mean, I just recently got priced out of Blacksburg, and now I had to move to Christiansburg, the Christiansburg part of my district. And so that's a huge concern where I've seen people, both the local folks and the college students, where they're both concerned about that. I think there's different stages of life, and that's more what brings the differences of people's like if you don't have kids, you're probably not thinking about your kids' education as much as some maybe the locals are, versus the people at Virginia Tech are thinking about the Board of Visitors and decisions like that. And so those are where I find the biggest differences is, are they issues that a local focus person is facing or of a college student might be facing. But otherwise, I think there is a similar sense that people are just struggling and they need somebody to help address some of those concerns.
Now, as your platform states, where education is concerned, quote, investing in our kids is investing in the future of Southwest Virginia, unquote. Now, coming from a region that is faced with various socioeconomic and demographic challenges, what would investing in its children and in its future look like?
Yeah, for me, I always say that, Virginia doesn't have a funding problem, we have a priority problem. When I was a high school math teacher, I had to fight for the markers I needed to use on the whiteboard. And I was a math teacher, so we used a lot of markers. But then when I went and worked in the state delegate's office, I went into Richmond. I never believe the moment. I went into Richmond and my boss was like, go get some stuff, some office supplies from the supply room. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll go get some stuff. And I go into this room, it's like a Staples version, but taxpayer funded. It's this huge office. I could go in and get whatever I needed and for however much I needed. And no cost, no questions. I was like, I don't have to sign this out by the legislator. And they're like, no, just take it. And I was like taking full things of markers and binders and paper clips and packs of paper. And I just think back to when I was a teacher, it's like, I fundamentally needed a marker to educate our youth, and I couldn't get access to it. But a legislator who has all the funds that they could possibly need have this taxpayer-funded Staples. And so for me, we just have to make sure that we're prioritizing education, and that means making sure we are adjusting the funding formula. We really haven't made significant changes in the way we invest in schools since before I was born, and I would like to see us update the funding formula and make sure the states are putting in the money for our kids' future. And so we have the money. We have a $2.1 billion surplus here in Virginia, and so it's about time that we make sure we're looking out this next generation.
And in terms of this priorities problem, rather, is there anything else that you think Virginia state legislators have not been prioritizing in the past that they should?
I think overall there's a couple of things. We still don't have paid family medical leave, and so folks aren't able to take their kids and parents to the doctors if needed, and so that's a big priority I think that we need to fix. If we're going to be a state that's for families, we should have paid family medical leave. Another big one is making sure that people have that we have lower costs for prescription drugs. We had legislation before the General Assembly, but the governor ultimately vetoed it, and that would bring down the cost of prescription drugs. I think we're going to have a whole lot of budget challenges moving forward forward because no matter what party you're in, there are going to be things from the federal government that are tossed back onto the states that now we're going to have to pay for. And so the next General Assembly will be deciding whether we finish funding for Medicaid, SNAP benefits, whether we are paying for the energy programs for lower income communities, whether we're making sure we continue our Meals on Wheels program that funds, make sure seniors have access to food, or make sure our kids have free school lunches. Those are all things that are going to be thrown back onto the state's budget. And so while right now those things are funded federally, we will be looking at that. Whatever next majority is elected will be in charge of making sure those things get covered, or maybe they don't want them covered.
So, speaking of the majority that gets elected, if you win in November, you will likely be one of only 2 House Democrats from Southwest Virginia, the other, of course, being your former boss, Roanoke Delegate Sam Rasool. How exactly do you plan on working with your Republican colleagues in order to tackle the issues that face this region and to represent this region as best you can?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people visualize or think of our politics is very polarizing because that's what the media and what we portray when we talk about our campaigns. But the truth is when you're in the General Assembly, 90% of the legislation passes with bipartisan support, and almost all of it is unanimous too. But we only talk about the 10% that passes on majority, by a majority vote, or on party lines. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. And so when I worked for Delegate Rasool, I worked for him both in the minority and the majority, and so I really worked on building those relationships. When I worked for Delegate Rasool, we had one of the highest pass rates when we were in the minority, and we also had a high pass rate when we were in the majority. And so I'm already very familiar on how you get legislation through in the majority and minority. I also know that regional partnerships are just as important as party partnerships. And so one of the big things that I saw a few years ago, people don't talk about, like when I tell you the story, you probably have never heard of this, but a Republican delegate down in Southwest Virginia noticed that we were struggling with at-risk funding for schools. And that's the funding that helps rural schools and urban schools. And Republican delegate in Southwest partners with an urban delegate in a Democratic majority area in Richmond. And they worked together and built this coalition, and then they were able to increase the funding for at-risk school funding. And so doing things like that where we can find places where we can work together. I mean, Interstate 81 is a good example. We got funding for that through a Democratic state senator and a Republican delegate here. And so people are interested in working together. We don't talk about it enough, I think. We should spend more time talking about how we are doing things together.
Yeah. And sort of expand on what you're able to learn as you worked for Delegate Rasool as his chief of staff for a number of years.
You know, I was there for 5 years, and so I learned a lot about how legislation worked. But I think the most important lesson I learned wasn't so much that the power that legislators have in passing legislation, but the power that you have in bringing people together to solve community problems. I'll give you an example. We realized early on in his district there was a really prominent food desert, and that means people don't have access to produce, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term. And what we were able to do is we were able to bring partners to the table. No legislation required, no appropriations of funds. We brought together Feeding America. We brought in Roanoke College, who did a study on the neighborhood. We brought in Carillion, who is the local medical center, and we brought those partners, and then local government elected officials, and we brought those partners together. And now in that area, there's a full grocery store that wasn't there, and they were able to recruit and bring in a grocer, and they were able to bring in some other community partners and things that they needed in that, including some hypertension testing, which is also a problem there that Carillion realized. And so what I learned is that when you're elected, you can see problems, and then it's your job to bring people together to solve those problems. And so I guess that's probably it's probably the thing I'm most excited about, is that we are going to be able to do that right here.
And now, final question on Delegate Rasool. Has he reached out to you over the course of the campaign, offered any advice, any words of encouragement?
Yeah, he has. We've talked plenty of times across the course of the campaign. You know, for him, he was one of the first people that taught me and keeps reminding me to give people a vision of something to vote for and not vote against. He's just constantly talking about what we can do for people and making sure we stay focused on the communities that we're serving. So.
Now, according to the Virginia Public Access Project, you've raised, as of August 31st, a total of $893,914. Good enough for 7th among House candidates, 3rd among non-incumbents, and 1st among Democrats in Southwest Virginia. What do you think that says about the appeal of your campaign and the importance of this race?
It shows that people are prioritizing this race, that they see how important it is. I think what's more important than the total dollar raised is that I have 4,336 contributions under $100 versus my opponent only has 87. It shows that our race is not only funded by people around the state, but also by grassroots folks that want to believe in something better. And I think it shows the strength of our campaign and the network that we built. It also shows that people are excited about this race, and that's going to help once I'm elected too, that people have built these relationships and partnerships across the state that can help us deliver legislative results as well.
Yeah. And elsewhere you've mentioned that you would not be accepting campaign funding from Virginia's two big utility companies, Dominion Energy and Appalachian Power. How important is that to you in terms of sort of regulating who influences your campaign?
It's really important to me. So I've pledged not to take any money from public service corporations, and so that's like Dominion Power, Appalachian Power, and then there's some other public entities that are regulated by the states. And the reason why it's important that we specifically don't take this money is the General Assembly, which is a position I'm running for House of Delegates, gets to help decide who sits on the board that regulates these electric power companies. And to be taking money from the same people that we are then going to be voting on to regulate these companies is a corrupt practice. It doesn't, when you talk, so many people in other states, when they hear about Virginia's campaign finance laws, they're like, this is the Wild West. And it's true, because right now in Virginia, you can write a check for however much you want to any candidate in Virginia, as long as you're willing to disclose like your address and your name and things like that. And so for me, it's important that we are representing the people that we're representing the people we're running for. And so I would like to also see campaign finance reform done at the state. The bare minimum, we should have limits on how much people can donate, and we should be banning the practice of public service corporations donating to candidates as well.
Now, political violence. It's been a rising issue in this country, even in the Commonwealth, with the recent death threats against Republican Delegate Kim Taylor of the 82nd District. As delegate, how would you go about addressing this issue and political polarization writ large?
First off, political violence really is never okay. It doesn't belong in our politics, and we should be electing leaders that are going to deliver on that. You know, since the beginning, since I started this campaign, and we talked about already in the interview that I'm giving people something to vote for. I'm very specific about my messaging when I talk about my opponent. It's very much on bills that he has voted against that people should know in this region. I'm not out here villainizing my opponent and talking negatively. And I think it is up to the leaders of this country to redirect the way we talk about people and the way we are having these conversations, and that we need to be leading. I keep hearing from both sides of the aisle, people are like, there's no way these two sides can come together. We even had a senior member of the Republican Party here in Virginia say that there would be war between these two sides. That is rhetoric we do not need in today's world. We are in one ship in the United States, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, and it's up to us to decide if we're going to sink or if we're going to sail. And for me, that means toning down the temperature. It means talking about the issues and reminding people that there is something worth fighting for, and then let the voters make their decision after that. And that's just something that's fundamentally critical to me and the type of leader that I will be.
And you mentioned your opponent, Chris Obenshain, who, of course, is the Republican incumbent for this district. In terms of not villainizing your opponent, I mean, what are your thoughts on Delegate Obenshain as a legislator, and also the relationship that you two have developed over the course of your two campaigns?
Yeah, every time I see Delegate Obenchain, we shake hands, we say hello. I saw his kids at our last debate and they waved and they were super friendly. And that's the kind of relationship I think you have. I mean, I'm not out here going to coffee or, we are running for the same seat and, we have different views on what the future should be. I think for me, I have been focused on this district and this campaign on what I can do for people. I wasn't impressed with what I've seen out of his office for the past 2 years, and it made me decide to run again for this seat. I think that we have costs have gone up 46% over the past 2 years. We have the highest unemployment rate. And then on top of that, we've had natural disasters that have been in this region, but I haven't seen anything from the leadership in Southwest Virginia, including my opponent. And so for me, it's really important that we aren't diving into the whatever you see on social media nonsense and really fixing the issues that we see right here in this district. And that's what I've been doing and the conversations I've been having. But I have a fine relationship with Delegate Obenchain. Even when I lost last time, I gave him a call and said, good luck. I hope you do a great job representing this region and things like that. And, I expect that we'll have that same kind of closeout of this campaign again. Hopefully he'll be calling me.
Now, as you know, the federal government shutdown is still ongoing. About 150,000 federal civilian employees live in Virginia, and even on the state level, state government offices are working to prevent furloughs if the shutdown persists. How have you seen the effects of the government shutdown in the 41st so far, and what do you expect to see if things continue like this?
So overall, what we've seen from the past 8 months in Washington is we have seen a lot of jobs lost in the region. Like I said in the last question, is we have one of the highest unemployment rates here in the region. Across the state of Virginia here in the New River Valley. And that has a lot to do with some of the new tariff policies and some of the places where they've had federal funding cuts where big factories have decided to shut down and lay off entire sectors. And so that's been huge across the district. But I think at the end of the day, I hear this over and over on doors as people are tired of the chaos and they just want things to go back to where they just function. They don't want the government shut down. I think the biggest threat, I guess, to kind of get back to the main part of the question, the biggest threat for this region is the funding that is around Virginia Tech University that we get federally. A lot of that hasn't been adjusted because of the shutdown. We've just seen continuing attacks on higher education overall from the federal government, and so we don't have a state governor that's supporting our universities right now either, and so I think that that's going to be important moving forward in this election cycle, is if you want somebody supporting our institutions of higher education here in Virginia, that we have one person running for that in this race at the top of the ticket, and then also myself. And so that's where I've kind of seen the biggest damage. I think there's some work around at the Veterans Care Center in Salem, which isn't in the district, but it funds this regional area, that there's been some cuts there too. And so we have seen a lot of cuts, but not directly related to the shutdown here.
And just sort of on the broader topic of federal actions with local consequences, how do you view your potential role as a delegate in relation to these things, and what could you possibly do to help ameliorate things for people?
Yeah, the state. So with what we're seeing federally happen is the things are getting cut federal and they're getting sent back to the states. And so the biggest thing that we'll have a role in is making sure that these programs continue to exist. For me, I think it's critical that every child, every person, every mom, every dad is able to go to the doctor when they're sick, when they're unwell, when they get in a car accident, they're not going to be bankrupt. I think it's critically important that we are making sure every kid has a full belly and that they can have food on their table, that seniors, that they have access to energy programs, that they can heat their house in the winter and they can keep it cool in the summer. And those are the programs that got cut federally. And in Virginia, we are in a better place financially than 40 of the other states. So I think we're at somewhere between 8th and 10th wealthiest states. So we are in a better place where we can cover some of these things. I won't lie that I don't think that it's possible for us to cover everything. So I'm hoping that we can flip Congress and overturn some of these terrible policies. But for me, we will have a role. That will be our major role, is making sure that these critical programs that make sure sick people get health care that they need, that our kids don't go hungry, and our seniors have heat and air, that these programs continue. And that's what I think that will be one of the major battles that I'll be fighting for in the General Assembly.
If you could expand a bit more on your proposals with regards to healthcare and making sure that, as you said, people can go to the doctor whenever they're sick, and just sort of sketch out what your plan is.
Yeah, so in Virginia, we have funds, extra funds here, and so we would have to make sure that one of the biggest cuts is Medicaid, and that when we've seen some of the they will come later into 2026, at the end of 2026 is when we see those Medicaid cuts, and so we will have to fund those. One that's going to affect us most recently and is the cause of the shutdown is the cuts for the credits if you're on the affordable health care marketplace. And we have to, I'm hoping that the federal government will end up funding those programs, but if not, people's insurance rates will go up double next year. That affects me, and affects my brother who has a small business here in Southwest Virginia. He has a Taekwondo studio. He's just doing it because he loves kids and wants to make sure that they have some fun and somewhere supportive to grow. But he will have to raise rates or maybe even close his doors with the increase. And so we can make sure that we're funding these programs. The other big thing when I talk about healthcare is making sure that we keep access, because what we've seen is that as we've made more restrictions, as we've made more funding cuts, rural localities get continually left behind. And I've already done some of this work, and we're started to make sure that we don't leave rural Virginia behind by making sure Virginia's doctor program was put here, and then we partnered Kailey and Radford for a nursing program. And I also helped bring the funding to UVA at Wise for the nurse practitioner program, because we found that when doctors are in a region or medical professionals practice in a region, that they're more likely to stay in that region. And so continuing to expand those programs, making sure that we're pushing these like Carillion and other folks to expand these opportunities for students in these school programs as well. So there's a lot to unpack in healthcare, to be honest, but because it's just so critical. I just hear that over and over from folks.
You're listening to wuvt-fm 90.7 Blacksburg. This is Jonathan Mususa with a special edition of WUVT News, an interview with the Democratic nominee for the 41st Virginia House of Delegates District, Lily Franklin. Now, a fairly recent topic in the news as of late. Recently, Democratic nominee for Attorney General Jay Jones was revealed to have made comments in a 2022 text exchange with his then House colleague, Republican Kerry Coyner, in which he appeared to joke about potentially killing then House Speaker Todd Gilbert. The selection of his texts reads as follows: 3 people, 2 bullets. Gilbert, Hitler, and Pol Pot. Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. Spoiler: put Gilbert in the crew with the 2 worst people you know, and he receives both bullets every time. These comments and others have received bipartisan condemnation, with Republicans, including Attorney General Jason Miyares and President Donald Trump, calling for Jones to drop out of the race. Do you condemn these comments, and would you call for Jones to drop out?
As I said earlier in the program, I do not support political violence in any form, and that's just been my message from the beginning, and it's what I keep saying over and over, that we cannot be continuing political violence, and that we have to make sure that we are calling it out, and then that is what I have done and seen across the state of Virginia. For me, when I talk to folks in this district, they are worried about their futures and making sure that people are fighting for them. And so for me, the biggest thing I've been doing is prioritizing the 41st district. When I go to door, I hear the concerns. People are worried about their kitchen table issues, making sure that their kids have good schools and that they have access to health care and that they have lower electric bills. And so so for me, I've been prioritizing this race in the 41st district. I think so often when people get elected, they focus on all the other things happening and they forget about the people that they are serving. And for me, that is my priority in making sure that we are fighting for the 41st district. For so long I've watched policy initiative after initiative get dropped from Southwest Virginia, and so I just want to make sure that I'm delivering for this region and staying focused on the 41st.
So you would not call for Jones to drop out of the race?
I am focused on the 41st district and making sure that we are delivering for this region. I am upset with where he went with those comments, and but I think for me it's making sure that we prioritize this region.
And on that topic, with the national attention that this and various other races that will be taking place in Virginia in November have gotten, how often is it that you will have national politics sort of intruding on this race, so to speak, and how do you go about sort of refocusing things on local issues?
Well, the biggest thing is that I talk to people where they're at, and I don't wait for them to come to me. I make sure I meet them door to door, being out in the community, hearing their concerns and listening to them. Because if you do just sit and you scroll social media, then you do think that this is the only thing people are thinking about. That's got to be. I mean, if you scroll through X or Twitter today, you follow a lot of political stuff, you would think that nobody cares about working class Virginians, that they only care about texts sent or the other lieutenant governor candidate that has the porn scandal or whatever is going on there, but when you're out in the community talking to voters door by door, over and I hear I've knocked thousands of doors, and almost every single one of them is talking about something that would make their lives better, and that's the kitchen table issues. They want better schools for their kids. They want to have child care access. They want to make sure that that their schools are representative of their values if their students here at the university. They want to make sure that they have access to good jobs and they can afford to live here in the community, that they can buy a house someday. These are things I just hear over and over, and that's why sometimes it's hard. That's the hardest part of being a leader, staying focused on the people staying focused on the reason you're running and what you're trying to do and accomplish, because there are so many distractions. But I know that the people of the 41st district will be better if we are focused on the issues they are worried about.
And with Election Day less than a month away, and given everything we've touched on so far, is there anything that you would like to share with the people listening this evening?
Yeah, we have a month away from Election Day, 28 days, if you're still counting today. We have early voting here in Virginia, so you can go cast your ballot right now. There's a Christiansburg early voting center here in Montgomery County if you're registered to vote. If you're a student, you can register to vote here in Blacksburg. This is going to be a top race here in Virginia. And if you're thinking about this specifically, why you should vote for me, if you're ready for a new generation of leadership that is going to prioritize the students, and that's going to prioritize the people of the district and overall the chaos that we see, and that they're going to deliver real results, then I'm going to be the candidate for you. I am focused on making sure that we are making people's lives better. There are so many things that we need to address in this upcoming 2 years. So I'm looking forward to serving, and if you have any questions, you can go to lilyfordelegate.com, and we've got policies and ways to get in contact with me.
All right. Ms. Franklin, thank you again for joining us this evening.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Special thanks to News Director Mary Peyton Marble and reporters Vanessa Wigfall and Zachary Che for their research contributions in preparation for this interview. For WUVT News, I'm Jonathan Mususa.